Right, bro.
George Kilpatrick Inspiration for the Nations, celebrating people we feel good about. Dr. Clemmie Harris is the Director of Africana Studies at Utica University and also Professor of History there. And we invite him on from time to time to give us the State of the Union, if you will, okay? Which is what we had this past week, where we had the longest speech in history that many folks, including some in the chamber, in the joint session of Congress, had sort of a visceral reaction to, including the removal of Representative Green from the chambers for what they say was behavior, whatever. So, what do we make of this, Dr. Clemmie Harris? This where we are today. Let me just point out to listeners that you gave us a preview of this when you talked about Project 2025 and what it was supposed to do, especially and including the fact that the president said he didn't know anything about it. And then when you see what has been implemented, it's page by page by page by page. So to speak. So State of the Union happened this past week. Did you watch? And if you did, what did you think? And if you didn't, why didn't you?
So, Brother Kilpatrick, I want to thank you for inviting me on, and thank your listeners for really allowing me to come into their homes. I want to say, first off, that I did not watch the State of the Union. Let me be very clear. I watched a very little amount of it. And what I saw was much more of a sort of political attack on the resistance. I saw a sort of political defense of the actions of the second Trump administration over the last 43 days. I didn't see anything in the short time that I watched it that would hold my attention. What I have done is to sort of take a look at what journalists have identified, because I've been particularly interested in the policies.
Mm-hmm.
I would make the argument that what most were subjected to and what many are calling the longest State of the Union address in the modern history of the presidency was much more of a performance rather than a conversation about policy. I think that it ultimately had the same effect that his campaign had, that it ultimately gave reason to cheer for those who are uncritical supporters of Donald Trump. And conversely, it ultimately strengthened the opposition of those who recognize that he is bad for America. So let me simply state that as my opening so that your listeners are fully aware that I did not watch the beginning and ending of the State of the Union.
And so here we are. And so but we also find ourselves, so there's a couple of things there. Let me go back. You talk about the supporters and the staging of it, and it was what was striking to me as I looked at some of the reactions to it is that there didn't seem to be any parts of the speech that, for people that didn't vote for him, that was your president too, if you know what I'm saying. In other words, he made it very clear, I ain't your president.
Right, that's correct. That's correct.
I'm just being frank about that. Like, he said, I ain't your president. Basically, I am the president of the people who support me, who voted for me. But in practicality, I ain't your president and don't expect anything from me. That's how I perceive it.
So I want to say to you that your interpretation is not wrong. If you agree with the things that he is doing, then he is a president that will seek to represent you. If you disagree with what he is doing, then he is someone who is both, he has no empathy for your position and no sympathy for your suffering. And so one cannot say that even though he is the president of the United States, that he is a president who wishes to be representative of all 330 million citizens of the country. And I want to put this into context because politics is a civil structure for an ideological battle. You might even call it a sort of ideological war. Politics being a type of no holds barred form of ideological war. And all of that is designed to identify who will emerge as the victor of particular political contest. But once the battle has been declared, or winner has been declared in the battle, what is supposed to happen is that we are supposed to come together as a country, since we're talking about the president, and we have to come together for the sake of the country. That doesn't only mean voters who are not happy because their candidate didn't win. It also means that the person in the office has a moral obligation, and I would dare say a political responsibility to ensure that all people in the nation are fairly, with an emphasis on fairly, represented. That is to say, that any effort to continue to cause division, to engage in politics that are on their face extremely harmful, is inconsistent with how the country is supposed to come together and the expectation we should have from our elected leaders.
The state of our union, let's think about this, right? So Trump sued ABC because George Stephanopoulos said that he was a rapist, as opposed to being found liable for sexual assault, right? Two different things. ABC paid. Sued CBS because CBS edited Kamala Harris' interview, which they said made her seem more articulate than she was. Looks like CBS is about to pay. The Washington Post, Jeff Bezos, who owns that and Amazon, said that the opinion page is about to change and, it's going to be a different opinion page. Now, to the Post credit, it still has not, at this point, right, stopped its editorializing on what they deem as the failures of this administration and the dangers of an Elon Musk and what they're carrying out, at least from their perspective, at least from that editorial page perspective, right? What I'm getting at is and if you are the press and you critique or say, for example, you're the Associated Press and you don't go along with calling the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America, you have your credentials removed or you removed, and I think now they filed suit to restore that. In other words, we're in a dangerous time because now you have journalism they're weaponizing journalism, and if you say something, they're going to sue you, and then there's no protection for you because the bureaus of protection are being eliminated. What is the state of our union, bro? With all of that going on.
So, as you were speaking, I was thinking about a familiar era in history where the use of investigatory methods were deemed unfair and fact base was replaced with rumor and innuendo.
Mm-hmm.
all of which was specifically designed to suppress opposition. In the United States, that materialized in the post-World War II period, and there is a word for it. It's called McCarthyism.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to McCarthyism, it emerged in Europe. It was called fascism. In other words, one of the first things that happens in order to suppress civil liberties is to attack the free press,
Mm.
the ability to engage in fact-based information. We can also include the attack on DEI and African American history as a part of this overall moment. To be clear, what I see is how the nation has allowed for the most important of our amendments. There's a reason why they call it the First Amendment, to largely become vulnerable to these types of attacks. If we can ultimately cause the press to be very, I guess the simplest thing to say is to not engage in the type of fact-based investigatory journalism that W.E.B. Du Bois said in The Soul of Black Folk in 1903, that the basis of any sound democracy is an informed electorate, and the electorate is most informed by a investigatory press, a press that has investigatory journalism, where arguments are made based in fact and people are informed. The key here is that that information is then given to the people, and the people get to decide. It is the foundation of a democracy. So, too, is the ability to go to a university and be able to choose the various types of courses you would choose to give you competing models of knowledge to understand particular problems. Let me put it to you this way. I was on a radio show last Tuesday. Your viewers should know that in the last week of Black History Month, I launched a series of lectures where I sought to use the lens of the long Black freedom struggle to
Mm-hmm.
address the current moment that we are in. And in that radio show, Talk of the Town, I said to the interviewers who all had, various talking points, and I emphasize talking points, not facts about DEI. I
Right.
said, imagine if you are told, given the fact that every human being, most of us have at least three models of history upon which our identity rests. One that comes from our mother, one that comes from our father. And because we are self-conscious individuals, the history that we create as agents of our own history, our own future. Now imagine someone telling you that you no longer have access to one or more models of that history. What does that do to you? Imagine that someone says you could only rely on this particular model of history, and all others that are not consistent with this model, you must ignore or face a heavy penalty.
Mm.
What does that do to you? What does that do to your sense of identity? What does that do to your sense of your children's identity, that they are effectively cut off from a particular model or models of history? What we are in right now is an anti-democratic, an illiberal moment where we are ultimately being denied the access to fact-based information, which again, I go back to the point that W.E.B. Du Bois made in The Soul of Black Folk in 1903. The basis of any sound democracy is rooted in an informed electorate.
Hmm. Dr. Clemmie Harris, the director of Africana Studies at Utica University, professor of history. Listen, it seems to me, to when I ask you the state of our union, I guess where I'm going is we're not. I don't think we're really clear about how we can resist what's going on, because we're talking a lot about all of this stuff and it's still happening. Right now, I was talking to Congressman Mannion a few days ago, and he was saying, we're fighting behind the scenes, we're litigating and litigating, and yeah, this week, the Supreme Court surprisingly gave they gave a victory to the resistance. Right? They stopped the they said that they couldn't cut off the $2 billion to U.S. aid. They had to honor those contracts. Now we'll see if that actually happens, because what it seems this administration is saying, we don't really care what the courts say. That's the perception you get. What do you say to that on the state of our union?
Well, listen, there's no doubt whatsoever that we are in one of the most extreme periods in the modern history of this country. You made a comment earlier on about several community-based talks that I led in the fall when I went to two different congressional districts and delivered a series of talks about the dangers of Project 2025. Your listeners should also know that I am a former candidate for the Democratic nomination of the 22nd Congressional District. And one of the primary reasons I ran was because of the emergence of political extremism and what I foresaw if we did not have enough voices to ultimately help inform the people of what was coming. And what was coming was a form of extremism that had two fundamental purposes. One was to ultimately reshape the federal government in a way that would make it completely unrecognizable from the FDR origins. In other words, what we see right now in terms of the state of our union is an effort to restructure the federal government so that it no longer has the ability to facilitate the type of liberal policies. Your listeners might understand it in this context, Brother Kilpatrick, that if we go back to Contract for America in 94,
Newt Gingrich.
with Newt Gingrich. Newt Gingrich did what he tried to replicate what occurred in the New Deal in the 1930s. In the first 100 years of the Republican-controlled Congress, Newt Gingrich passed with lightning speed conservative policy after policy after policy. Take that foundation and now take a look at what Donald Trump is and his government is seeking to do. He is seeking to not only attack the policy, any liberal policy that comes from that era, namely Social Security, right? He's not only seeking to attack that, he's also seeking to attack the very structure of the federal government that we see today that has its roots in terms of its formation during the period of the New Deal, right? This is what ultimately the state of our union is undergoing, a restructuring of the federal government. To put it in another layer, the state of our union is attempting to be run as a business rather than a government. We have to think about that. The reason it is a government, it is because the reason of government or the purpose for government is to serve the people, to provide a service. Business is to return on those who invest in the business. It is to make a profit for shareholders. Now, ask yourself the question, if we allow this to move forward, if we allow oligarchs to continue to reshape a 2.3 million workforce, where does the savings go? Who
Right.
benefits from that savings? Right? Does that savings in the form, does the savings ultimately get turned into greater services for the disadvantaged? Do we strengthen our social safety net to ensure that the most vulnerable in our society have that which they need, which the Constitution promises? Or do we take those same savings and then we develop another tax bill that ultimately rewards the already ultra rich in the country? The state of our union is in peril because of the extremism and the efforts to take the country into a direction that is an attack on civil liberties, as we've already talked about earlier with the press, and to ultimately turn the country into the business. And those who will benefit from that are those who are already very, very wealthy. The final point that I'll make is this. The nation historically has paid little attention to the importance of natural rights or civil rights. And let me be very clear. When the nation was formed, it was formed with the understanding that all people, by virtue of humans being human, are to have natural rights. Within the context of the United States, three philosophical points underpin what those natural rights were to be: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those three philosophical points are foundational in the Declaration of Independence. Those three philosophical points are the basis upon which the Constitution emerges, where what was natural rights are now codified in the form of civil rights. However, when it comes to a choice between economic growth versus the insurance of civil rights, overwhelmingly across our history, civil rights has suffered to ensure that economic wealth prevails. The interesting part of it is this: political rights, i.e., civil rights, and economic rights are not two opposing ideas, Brother Kilpatrick.
Right.
They're two sides of the same coin. So we're having a conversation right now, not about freedom, but about privilege. Who
Mm.
gets to have privilege? Rights are not even a part of that conversation. That's what's happening in the state of our union.
Dr. Clemmie Harris is the director of the Africana Studies program at Utica University. And a quick question about that. Does Africana Studies survive in the area? Are you good?
That is an open question. I am in debates with my colleagues. We are fighting. If anyone has paid attention, um, Ohio State University has basically lost its DEI program and its Black study, the Black Student Union is also under attack. So it is an open question. All I can say to you is that we will continue to fight to ensure that students have a choice, that they have a choice to what they wish to teach, what they wish to learn, that they have a choice between education versus indoctrination. The
Mm-hmm.
interesting thing about what I teach, Brother Kilpatrick, is this: it is not required. You, as a student, you can decide to come into the class. You can even decide, if you registered, if you don't like the content, that you can leave, right? But the one thing that historically has been true is this: whether you are in white skin, the darkest of Black, or points in between, all students have historically asked, Why did it have to take until college for them to learn the history of global Africa and its contributions to society?
Dr. Clemmie Harris is the director of Africana Studies at Utica University and a professor of history, talking to us about the state of our union. I'm sure we'll have him back, and there's more to come. Appreciate you, brother.
Appreciate you, brother.
Inspiration for the nation.